Hello and welcome back to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I have a wonderful guest with me today. What I love about him is he's going to talk about a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, which is healthy aging, aging with vitality, and health and fitness over 50. His name is Lyman. He is an author, speaker, and coach who made a conscious decision to die healthy when he was 25. Ever since that day, Al made it his goal to learn how to create good health and vitality and share what he learned to empower others to do the same. He is known as the Age Optimizer, helping people live stronger in their second half, specializing in age-related health coaching for mature adults determined to beat the doctor dance and take back their lives. He is also the author of the book titled Age Well and Feel Great, the proven path to solving the aging puzzle and going the distance, and the creator of the B.E.A.T Aging Transformation. Al, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here. So great to meet you. I can't wait to get into our conversation. And that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for sharing that as well.
Well, let's just get right to it. You do have a very compelling story in many ways, and I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you just take it over and tell us what happened, how you got interested in health and wellness and vitality.
Well, thank you. You know, it's interesting. I'm going to be turning 64 in just a couple of weeks, and it's amazing as the years go on how we're able to reflect back on our lives and begin to understand how some of the experiences we've had and the challenges we've faced, whatever it may be, through our childhood and young adulthood, and how those experiences really shaped us and turned us into the people that we are. And I think that's the wisdom of, hitting our mid-60s as we can look back. As I think back, as a kid, I wasn't athletic. I didn't do sports, and I was always... And I have vivid memories of this. Always the last kid to get picked on the playground when it came to kickball and those kind of sports. And, as time went on and I reached my teens, I, of course, was thinking about a career, and my primary vocation was music. And so when I finally got my first big professional gig, I noticed a lot of folks around me were exercising and getting into shape. And I thought, you know what, I should probably do the same. So I decided to join some friends and start a running program. And boy, it was hard. Running was really hard. And of course, not having been athletic, not playing sports, I really struggled with it. And I would honestly say distance running is not for everybody, that's for sure. But I kept with it. And as time went on, I got into the running lifestyle, and I started to sort of adopt healthier eating habits and started to think about all of the ways that my health is impacted by my daily habits. And interestingly, as time went on, I started to also notice people around me and, what I thought of as stark differences in the health of different people, and specifically my family. My mom and dad were both smokers, and I noticed how they struggled a lot. And of course, with different health issues. Sadly, my dad passed away now, I guess, almost 23 years ago from brain cancer. And unfortunately, and equally sadly, my mom is still alive and 93, but suffering terribly, unfortunately. And I just honestly just returned from Connecticut from a visit with her, where she's in a home now. And it's really interesting whenever I tell somebody my mom is alive still at 93, and their first reaction is always one of a little bit of jubilation. But I always think about a conversation I had with my mom. It was probably almost 20 years ago now, and I tell the story in my book. I asked her point blank, Mom, what would you do if you knew you were going to live to be 100, but you were not guaranteed of good health up until those years? And at the time, she scoffed and just kind of, pushed me aside. And unfortunately, that's been I'd say the bulk of our conversations when it comes to her health and very sadly, and I'm being very transparent now, Cheryl, I'm seeing all the manifestation of our conversations come to reality now at this stage. She's in tremendous physical pain and is lonely and feels isolated and is really unable to leave her bed and struggling with all of those things that unfortunately many of us see whenever we visit a convalescent. So in any case, back to me. Here I was in my early 20s. I was starting to get in shape a little bit, starting to adopt a healthier lifestyle and noticing people around me. And again, this ill health that seemed to be more pervasive, and at least that I became more aware of. And one day when I was walking over to the gym from where this organization I was in was rehearsing, I was walking with a friend and he asked me, he said, Al, why do you run? Because he didn't get it. He didn't enjoy running. And for some reason, all this stuff had been coalescing and floating around in my brain. And I stopped and paused and looked at him and I said, I run to square the curve. And he looked at me and said, square the curve? What does that mean? It doesn't make any sense. And I said, imagine living your entire life in good health, free of disease, free of dysfunction, able to do what you want to do with the people you want to do it with, living life on your terms, not on a doctor's terms or a disease's terms. And then one day, like at the age of 110, just you go to sleep and you don't wake up the next day. And he was like, wow, that sounds amazing. That's not possible, is it? And of course, I think in truth, it's a bit of a pipe dream for sure. This idea of dying healthy, which is how I reframed it in my own mind, is probably something that isn't realistic for most people, but I think it is certainly realistic to delay the onset of disease and to make more of our years as high quality as possible. It's a term I think that's become more popularized. It's health span versus lifespan, right? It's the quality of our years rather than the length of those. And ironically, I think in this day and age, more of us are living longer, especially due to advances in medical technology and pharmaceuticals. But I would argue for many, the quality of our years, and certainly, sadly, my mom is a great example of this. The quality of our years might not be improving at the same rate, all things being equal. So from that moment when I was 25 and sort of this, realization, this aha moment of, I run to square the curve, I began to think about what it would take to actually create this reality, to be able to live healthier and do all I could to control, at least to the best of my, whatever I could control, my health outcome, how my life would actually flow out. And we know, Cheryl, that, so much of life is a mystery, right? So much of why certain people become sick and other people don't is largely unknown. But I think there's a lot we do know. And that certainly is what I wrote, about in my book, Age Well and Feel Great, is focusing on those things that are the controllables. And so the science certainly tells us that our lifestyle probably accounts for 80% of our health outcomes. The foods we eat, how we manage stress, the sleep we get, certainly the exercise we do, the movement we're able to incorporate into our lives, and so many other things from dental health and right on down the line to certainly the dangers of modern life that we're exposed to every day in our environment, whether it's, the products we use to clean our kitchens or bathrooms and so forth and so on. So there's so many things that impact, ultimately how our health will manifest. And I like to think that there's a lot that's in our control. And I've certainly, as I said, spent most of my life trying to learn what those things are.
Excellent. Well, you've done an incredible job, obviously, doing that. And one of the things that I really like that you're talking about is movement. And, I think there's a difference between movement and exercise. I am a recovering physical therapist who hates exercise and thinks that chocolate is food, because it is. But I love movement and I love to move. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make when they start thinking about exercise. No, but there's no way I'm going to run unless, I'm running for my life. But there are other things that you can do to keep yourself younger in body, mind, and spirit, and healthy. besides just doing traditional exercise?
Well, no question about it. You bring up a great point. It's interesting. At one point in my book, I discussed this idea that I think in this day and age, many of us are thinking about exercise. So we try to take that 20 to 30 minutes of our day to set aside for some type of structured exercise. But at the same time, a lot of what I'm seeing, and I think you'd probably agree, is the remainder of the day for many of those people involves very little movement. So I encourage people to try to incorporate movement into their day in any way that they can, be it gardening, chores around the house, parking a little farther from, the door at the mall or the grocery store, getting in a little extra walking. Any of those kinds of things are really important, because at the end of the day, it is about just simply being outdoors as much as we can and exposing ourselves to our natural environment. I encourage people to be barefooted as much as is feasible or possible for them, to create good contact with the ground and in a way improve our sensory input. As a result, all that information coming in from our environment is enhanced. And also, what's interesting too, you reminded me, one of the chapters in my book is actually titled Exercise, the Struggle is Real, because I really wanted to do a deep dive into why most of us, are honestly even hate the word exercise. And hate's a strong word, but I know that most people don't feel about it the way that I do. That's for sure. And when I finally realized most people don't think the way that I do, that was my own little aha moment, of course. But what writing that chapter helped me realize was, when I started to really research and look at it in a little bit more detail, our evolution as a species, I realized we aren't wired to exercise. We are wired to move, right? But our bodies and even just our mindset is to be efficient and economical. If we think about our ancestors, they might have been nomadic and they would have had to move from one place to the next. But because they had to forage for food, maybe climb, maybe dig, and maybe even run from predators, if we can imagine such a thing, then during those periods of time when they weren't having to do those things, they would move as little as possible and try to conserve energy. So I think when we think about it in that respect, it makes sense that it wouldn't be natural for us to create structure and then go and do something in a structured way, in the way that we think of exercise. So I guess to your point, because I think this is why you brought it up, as little structured exercise as possible can be balanced beautifully with unstructured movement, right? Incorporated into our day in a natural and normal way.
I love the fact that you brought up our environment, because we do not live in a natural state. You look around us, I mean, everything is, everything is, I don't want to say false or fake, but everything is structured in a way that we're at our computers, we're at our office, we're at the grocery store. We don't go out and live in nature the way they did, years and years ago. We're so spoiled and we're so fortunate, just get in the car and drive to wherever you want to go. And we forget how healthy and how healing it is to be outside, even going for a walk.
Yeah, that's a beautiful observation. And it, of course, I think when we talk about our environment, we have to talk about artificial light, because that's the first thought that came to my mind when you mentioned this. So I'm always encouraging people to follow my lead. I go out every morning as soon as the sun is rising, and I have the option of being able to do this. And I live in Florida, so that's a nice benefit. But as soon as the sun is rising, I go outside and try to expose my eyes to that natural light and just go out and move a little bit and go through some joint articulations, just get my joints moving, just get the blood flowing. And by the same token, I think it's really smart to limit the amount of artificial light in the evening and in the afternoon hours, because it comes back to our circadian rhythm to some degree, our ability to get in sync with these natural rhythms. To your point, our ancestors wouldn't have had to have a clock to know what time of day it was. They would know just by the sun rising and setting.
And the rooster
So
crowing. That's how my dad
yeah,
used to wake up when he was
there
a
you
little boy.
go. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, artificial light, absolutely terrible. And of course, I mentioned I visited my mom over the last few days and spending a fair amount of time in the emergency room at the hospital. She was there for 36 hours before
Oh,
being transferred. And I noticed the entire time she was there, the light never changes. You don't know whether it's morning or evening.
right.
And all these fluorescent lights, I can't even imagine. And of course, that's the same thing staring into a computer to some degree or staring into our smartphones. It is so important to try to minimize exposure to that artificial light later in the day and prepare for sleep, because at the end of the day, the quality of our sleep is everything as it relates to our health as well.
Two things that really just spoke to me: the fluorescent light, because even before you said it, I had already even written it down. I cannot stand fluorescent lighting. At the dojo, the old dojo, they actually used fluorescent lighting. And I could feel my nervous system start to buzz. It'd be like, zzz, zzz,
Right.
zzz. And it would take me a while after I left the dojo to be able to calm myself down. I think it is so detrimental to our nervous system. It's just terrible. And then the other thing that you said was like candy to my ears, the joint articulation. So when you get up, it's not like you just hit the ground running, or you start stretching your muscles, you start moving your joints to lubricate them and get the fluids going. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a really important topic: joint health and stretching and flexibility.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So for about 10 years, I worked, actually co-owned a gait analysis lab with a sports
Ooh.
physician. This was in Connecticut. I still owned that business, but operated predominantly online at pursuitathleticperformance.com. So every day we're working in clinic, helping people to recover from injury or prepare for surgery if they had been injured. And my desire to do that kind of work came out of my, obviously my evolution as a runner, where I was experiencing every single injury. I mean, runners always get injured. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so my desire to help myself heal and get to the root cause of these injuries forced me to just want to learn more about the human body and about how the body, works and functions, and getting to the root cause of disease and of dysfunction and injury. So through that process, of course, I'm looking very holistically at the body and how it needs to be integrated. And I often say that every body part has a job to do, much like a union shop. If one part's not doing its job, another part has to pick up the slack. So it's a very holistic viewpoint. But at the same time, Cheryl, I also learned to really zero in on the joints themselves and make sure they're functioning as joints need to. Because I think so much of what people struggle with is that one body part may not function as it should. Maybe a hip joint doesn't move the way that a hip joint should, and therefore the low back takes a little bit more stress, or perhaps the shoulder as well. So the idea of doing what I think of as joint articulations, and one of my certifications is as a mobility specialist with functional range conditioning. They call these articulations controlled articulation rotations, controlled articular rotations. The acronym is CARS. So it's the idea of disassociating so that we can move a joint very, sort of alone by itself, keep everything else sort of still, and really explore what that joint can do. And then try to improve it if there's a limitation. And there usually always is, and there's usually an asymmetry of some kind that's developed. I mean, we're asymmetrical creatures by nature, right? So I love the idea of doing a very close-up look at the joint and making sure the joint moves and moving the joints through their range of motion. I do a set of what I think of as daily controlled articular rotations for my neck, my spine, my elbows, my shoulders, scapula, of course, hips and ankles. And I'll spend some time in the morning going out and just going through that routine. All the folks that I work with will get that routine as well. So it's a very sort of a detailed look at the joint, but at the same time looking at the body very holistically, because it really needs to function in an integrated fashion. So it isn't about training a body part in isolation. Really, it's about looking at how the whole body functions as a holistic unit.
Yes, I love that, the holistic approach to the body. And I wanted to compare that to like traditional medicine. And I can say that, I mean, I am, like I said, a recovering physical therapist and a former respiratory therapist. So I spent many, many years in the traditional Western medicine world. But that holistic approach of watching how the entire body moves and then looking at that joint and helping to like bring it to the party so it's working the way it needs to support the
Right.
entire body, rather than saying, okay, here's a knee, you got a knee problem, we got to fix this knee. But that knee problem could be coming from somewhere else, even as you said, and I was so happy you said it, even maybe the shoulder. And right now, if people are listening to this, they're thinking, wait a minute, how can that possibly be?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, the site of the pain is very rarely ever the source of the pain.
Mm-hmm.
So it does require a very holistic view. And that is difficult, I think, in this day and age, especially in our modern healthcare system. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with the insurance, issues or challenges. And I think you could probably speak to that better than I could, although I was always frustrated that gait analysis, which is to say, looking at somebody and how they're moving and sort of assessing where their weak links might be. I was always frustrated that that was never covered under anybody's insurance. And it always made sense to me to be, as sort of proactive as possible, especially for children, because I think when we look at, secondary age children and even high school, we know that there's a percentage that are at higher risk of injury because of whether it's the shape of the bones of their feet or the shape of the bones of their hips, right? That might put them in a position where, in terms of their structure, they might be at higher risk of injury when they're out there running around in the field. So to try to learn about those students in advance and make sure that they're on the path where we could prevent, injury from occurring, because once they're injured, the risk of injury will at that point just continues to go up. So no, you're absolutely right. It is rarely ever about a specific issue, but somehow I think the insurance companies want us just looking right at that site of pain and treating it, and then keeping us coming back for many more visits. I don't know.
Well, that's a nice segue into the doctor dance.
Yeah.
And I really, really loved that when I was reading that in your profile. Never heard it put that way, but it's almost like, we were talking before the recording, how I really think that there is a lot more positive information about aging, healthy aging, anti-aging going on. But yet then there's that dichotomy of the people who just throw up their hands and say, well, this is it. I'm in my 60s and this is as good as it's going to get. I'm just going to sit back and take what's coming. I'll go to the doctor when I have a pain and ache and get the pills, get the surgery. But it just absolutely drives me crazy, because I think there is another way, and I don't exactly know where I was heading with this, but it's just something that I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many challenges, right? The pharmaceutical industry is so powerful. The lobby is so powerful in Washington, and everything really does come back to profits to some degree. I've often said, and if there's any healthcare providers listening, please don't take it personally, but there's just not a lot of profit in good health.
No.
At the end of the day, I think it does come back to profits to some degree. And I think, doctors are challenged because they're limited in terms of the amount of time that they can spend with patients. And I think most people place all their trust in their doctors rather than taking some responsibility themselves and trying to become more, enlightened as to what they need to do to perhaps reduce the amount of drugs or prescription meds they may be taking. I think for someone my age, I think the average at this point is, I think it's over 70% take at least 2 prescription medications now, 60 or older, I think is the latest.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's absolutely frightening. A great percentage of those are of course, statins to control cholesterol problems and a host of other, blood pressure, hypertension medications. All of these things that are very honestly easily controlled with changes in lifestyle over a period of time. But again, there's a lot of profit in those prescription meds. And honestly, it's easier. People, they want to take a pill. It is hard to make change, right? To start to incorporate more movement, to really make, conscious decisions about the food you're eating, but to try to avoid processed food, which is ubiquitous. It's everywhere now. And it's so damaging to our health if consumed on a regular basis. So a lot of the challenges we're faced with, they are hard. And I think most people would just go, you know what, it's just easier to do X, Y, or Z, to take this pill. And as long as my doctor says it's what I should do, it's what I'll do. And then what begins, I think, is a cascade of side effects from the medications that manifest in weight gain or lethargy or, fatigue. And of course, there's the ongoing challenges with losing muscle mass, what is known as sarcopenia. So age-related muscle wasting and all the downstream negative effects from that. So it's a cascade of what I call the indignities of aging. And I think at the end of the day, Cheryl, and I know you and I are on the same page here. It starts with our mindset and this idea that we can control this to some degree, that what we do in terms of our food and exercise and stress and sleep, these things really matter. They really matter. And we do have more control than we're sometimes led to believe. But that shift in mindset takes some initiative. It usually, unfortunately, takes somebody getting a diagnosis or getting, slapped in the face with some, dose of reality that makes them realize, oh my goodness, my life has changed, things have changed. And it comes back to something I talk about in the book all the time. What's your why? What is the why that you have? What's the reason, that you're making the choices that you're making? I know for me, it's about our memories. I've often asked the question, what if we could see our memories in advance, Cheryl? Would we do anything differently today? I'd love to ask that question, because we could think, and think about it in our mind's eye, see 2 very different images. One where we might be at our great granddaughter's wedding. Imagine that. Or, running around in a ball field with our, grandson or granddaughter, playing or carrying them or just having fun and creating those memories that last and are so important for both them and for us. And then conversely, seeing ourselves, in extended convalescence where we're unable to get outdoors and we're struck with loneliness. And I think, worst of all, becoming a burden to those that we least want to burden in the process of watching our health slowly decline and deteriorate. So very different memories. And if we could see these in advance, what would we do differently today? And for me, that's my why. I don't want to look back and say, what if, I just don't. And I think one of the things that I'm happy about, certainly proud of, and thankful for, by the way, because I do know that there's so much mystery, but here I am. As I mentioned, I'll be 64 in a couple of weeks, and my dad was diagnosed with a glioblastoma at 64 and passed at 65. And there are numerous pictures of him in the book. The book's dedicated to him. There's a picture of him at 59 where he looks like he's 80. I swear it's absolutely horrific to look at. So if nothing else, me sitting here proves that at least to some degree, it's not about our DNA and our genes exclusively, that's for sure.
Well, and you make a really good point as far as it's much easier to take a pill. And once you're in that, mindset, you're kind of stuck there, and having to change the mindset is so important. But I really want to highlight for the audience that you don't have to make a change everything. Just make one small change. One small change can make a really big difference. And then you start the cascade of more positive change. But, especially I think it's so important, as you said, to understand your body, to empower yourself through self-education and self-awareness, when that is really a powerful tool to have. So then you understand your body. When you go to the doctor and you need help, you can say, this is what's happening. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I think it is. This is what I've done. It puts you in the driver's seat rather than at their mercy and saying, just give me a pill. Like you said, they don't have a whole lot of time. And
For
I'm very fortunate that I have a family physician who I handpicked very carefully. But if I have something going on, like I had chest pain a couple of months ago, and I thought I knew what was happening, where it was coming from. I thought it was musculoskeletal, but it's chest pain. You might want to check it out. And I had gone to a chiropractor first and said, I think this is what it is, but I did want to check it out. So I go to my family physician. I said, this is what I think it is. And he's looking at my chart and he said, oh, that's the same thing you came in with last time you were here.
Yeah.
And so, we did the test just to screen, and he says, yeah, go back to your chiropractor. It's musculoskeletal. So
Yeah.
that is so empowering, rather than saying I'm having chest pain. I'm older than you just by a few years. So I'm in my late 60s, and it's, they could send me to the cardiologist, put me on these medications, but instead I was able to help narrow it down. So I didn't get stuck in that dance of the doctor's dance.
Yeah. 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 Well, you mentioned a bunch of things there that are so worthy of unpacking. Starting small, right? And I say this so often in my book. In fact, I say that we should start with a change. And I've done 9 Ironman triathlons and have a 2:30 marathon PR. So listen, it's coming from me here. We should start with a change that's so small it's almost imperceptible as a change. Because I think that is unequivocally the biggest mistake that most people make. And of course, we can relate it to, the New Year's resolution that has become so popularized. If we can start with a change that is so small, it's easy to incorporate with just a little bit of effort, and then repeat that change. And be consistent with it, then inevitably we're going to start to feel some positive results from that. That's going to motivate us to continue. And it's easy to add to it, right? And of course, it starts with wherever we are. If we spend the overwhelming majority of our time on the couch, then walking for 5 minutes straight is a challenge, right? But if we're, let's say, someone very different, let's say someone who goes to yoga class 5 days a week, but who is not eating very well, right? Or who may not do any strength training. So again, a small change for that person that might allow them to maybe take 20 minutes from one of those yoga classes and just do a little bit more strength work, or start to make one change to their diet where they're removing just one food on one day that might be processed or industrialized, and replace it with a real food. And it sounds so simple and so easy, but the power is in the consistency. The power is in repeating those habit changes and building on them over time. So yeah, starting small is the magic, because it's those actions, it's those small changes that build the motivation, that fire us up to keep going, for sure. And of course, I love your observation about self-awareness. Oh my God. I always say that, I've always felt like being fit, right? Feeling really good. And of course, we know fitness and health are, mutually exclusive. One doesn't necessarily guarantee the other. There are some people that are highly fit, but may not be particularly healthy at any moment in time. But I do believe that the more we improve our fitness, the more in tune with our body we become. And obviously, you're a great example of that. You're very in tune with your body. Any sensations that might not be considered normal to get checked out. And early diagnosis is absolutely so important, right? So being willing to ask the question, what is that? It doesn't feel normal. I need to get that looked at. It never hurts to ask the questions, and to look a little bit more deeply, because the difference between dealing with something quickly and resolving it versus having it turn into a long-term problem, is the difference there is early diagnosis in simple terms. So that self-awareness, man, it is so important. We all need to tune in a little bit more, trust our intuition, listen to our bodies, and get to know it and explore it. As we talked earlier about whether it's joint articulations, getting outdoors, exposing ourselves to more of our natural environment, and just learning more about our body. That's so important.
Absolutely. Oh boy, there was a observation I had there and it just went out of my head in a, oh yes, okay. Along with self-awareness is self-education. And I remember, I think I was in my early 40s when I decided to start reading labels at the grocery store, and I was horrified. I was absolutely astonished, because you were talking about processed foods, and yeah, they're convenient, they're packaged, they can last on the shelf for 20 years, and there's a reason why. But to look at what is in our food is very enlightening, very educational, and also a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, it sure is. It is terrifying, to be sure. And obviously we've talked about, and I usually will talk about my background being in fitness and in movement, but I really do believe, and I say this in the book, that I think the food we eat has as great or greater impact on our health than anything else that we do. It's certainly, if it's number one, exercise or movement might be 1A, but the reality is in our world in this day and age, the amount of processed food that's consumed is frightening. And the amount of seed oils that are used, which are typically thought of as healthy, and I question how healthy they are, but they're very inexpensive to produce. And so they're in all kinds of foods, both in restaurants that we visit, as well as in all of the processed foods that we see in the middle portion of the grocery store. And I often say, if we could just keep it really simple, Cheryl, just eat real food. Just look at food and go, is this something Mother Nature created, or is this something that was produced in a factory or a manufacturing plant? It really is as simple as that, at least in terms of a starting point.
I interviewed I think he was a chiropractor who ended up going into, nutrition and weight loss and weight control. And his take on oils was very, very interesting. And he said, he recommended avocado oil. And he said, yeah, it's pricey. He says, but typically if you go down the line, the cheaper the oil, the more damaging to your health it is. So the next time I went to the store and I picked up a bottle of avocado oil and I looked at the price, and it was like, well, okay, I'll just suck it up and I'll try it. And it is a delight to cook with, a delight to use on the salad. I even started using it as a moisturizer on my skin.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of the oils we should use and purchase, should be in glass bottles, darkened glass. And if you're buying something in a plastic bottle, that's a red flag to avoid it. What's interesting about the oils, and you brought up a good point, they are the good oils, that certainly very good olive oils, the avocado oil. It is expensive when you first look at it, but the reality is, I know that every time I'll go to buy one and I'll put it up on the shelf, you're not using a ton of it, and it lasts much longer than you think it probably will. And at the end of the day, I think it's some of the best money that you could spend, because I think that the difference between a good quality oil like avocado oil or olive oil versus a seed oil, that might be sunflower oil or any of those cottonseed oils, the difference in our health to our health, I think, is dramatic, because the amount of oxidation that happens to these other seed oils when they're manufactured, and the changes that are occurring, and the fact that they go rancid so quickly, and the fact that so many of the chronic diseases that we're dealing with now as a society that are killing us come back to oxidative stress and damage to vessel linings. Certainly, this is the case with heart disease. So I think our constant exposure to these oils, week after month after year, really adds up, and I think it contributes a great deal. The reality is, Cheryl, we think about it, how we eat as a society has changed dramatically in the last 50 to 75 years. And along with those changes we've seen an escalation in the incidence of so many of these chronic diseases that are literally killing us. So I don't think there's any chance at all that these two things, how our food is, how our eating habits have changed, and the rate of chronic disease, I think these things are closely aligned.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. The other thing is, when we're trying to educate ourselves on nutrition, that can be so incredibly confusing and overwhelming. And I think we're also fighting against the machine of the marketing campaigns. And I had one friend of mine, a friend of mine he was going to school to become a personal trainer. And he said one of their field trips when he was in school was to go to the grocery store and to look at the health foods. And they started reading the labels in the health foods.
Yeah.
And he said it was shocking, again, that they are promoting this as this is good for you.
Yeah, added sugar, you'll find it in virtually, every kind of processed food, all different kinds of sugars. That's the red flag for sure. Now, the reality is, in my book, Cheryl, I say we have to know the enemy. We have to get to meet the enemy. The enemy is real, and the enemy is unfortunately big food and big pharma. Those are what I call out. I think the marketing engines behind these large corporations is overwhelming. The billions and billions of dollars that are spent on advertising, on television and everywhere else. I often I get really upset at times when I happen to be watching TV and I see the ads for different drugs that will come across. I'm hoping that one of these days it will become illegal, that the ability for these companies to actually advertise their medications on TV will be outlawed. I'm hoping perhaps that'll happen at some point in the future. But no, it's all it's all about profits. It's sad to say, but just follow the dollar at the end of the day, unfortunately.
Yeah, those commercials drive me absolutely crazy, and everybody looks so happy, dancing around, this one little pill just made me feel so much better. And then you get to the end where they have the list of the possible side effects include blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'd rather have the disease, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there's ways to be able to either prevent the disease or even reverse its progress.
Yep. Yeah, no question about it. It's, it does come back at the end of the day to, us as individuals deciding to take control, and educating ourselves. And again, as I said earlier, sometimes I think it takes a diagnosis or a scary episode for people to be shocked into a reality, because when you get that diagnosis, whatever it may be, whether it's the big C word or whether we see somebody struggling with some form of dementia, or any of the other chronic diseases that I think are becoming increasingly prevalent in our society. When you get that diagnosis, it's frightening. It can be scary. Your life changes, your world shrinks, and all of a sudden, your ability to live life on your terms changes. And it doesn't have to be that way.
So since we've been talking about nutrition, I do have one specific question for you. What do you believe is the most important macronutrient?
Well, I think as we age, I think protein becomes increasingly important. We don't absorb it as well or process it. in our bodies as we do when we're younger. And I think the fact that there's a tendency, of course, to lose muscle, something we briefly touched on earlier, sarcopenia or age-related muscle wasting. Mm-hmm. So when we look at, the building blocks of our body and tissues, connective tissues, cells, it's protein, and our ability to continue to hold on to muscle. Something I say is the single most important thing for someone who wants to age well and feel great, is to build and maintain muscle mass. So I think it's probably protein, but I will say, and I repeat this often in my book, I don't believe there's a perfect diet for every person. I don't think every person needs or should, eat exactly the same way. I tend not to, fall in line with, the extremes on either end of the spectrum. In fact, you'll laugh. One of the chapters in my book is titled "Meat Eaters versus Vegetarians. Which one is right?" And I debate that topic throughout that chapter. And of course, as you could probably imagine, what I come back to is the idea of the quality of the food is what matters. Because I think meat eaters, if what you're eating is processed meats, that you're getting right, versus vegetarians, if you're eating more junk food and and your idea of a carbohydrate comes in a cardboard box. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a balance to be to be found for sure. I consider myself a meat eating, plant-based I guess, what's the word, omnivore. Thank you. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So I would say, all that being said, I still think protein is what we probably have to focus on. Interestingly, we want to make sure we're strength training while we're consuming a little bit more protein too.
And especially since you do have a background in music, I love that. That sounds like the title of a country song. A meat-eating, plant-based carnivore.
There you go. Yeah. It does sound like a country and western song.
There you go. I think it's great. So let's talk about your book. But before we do, talk about why strength training is so important. And I have a funny feeling this ties in with the protein as well.
Well, I think, the way that I look at aging, especially when considering the onset of disease and the indignities of aging. Mm. When I think about it, I basically put what happens or what can happen physiologically in one column, which is to say disease, cancer, heart disease, dementias. Mm-hmm. That's one column. And then the other column is our functional ability to participate in life, to be able to move, right? To be able to go out and do the things that we would like to do. Now, if we look at these two columns, in my mind, there's more mystery associated with the onset of disease. We want to do everything we possibly can to avoid and delay the onset of these diseases. But there's more mystery there as to what actually happens and why certain people are at greater risk. Mm-hmm. But in the other column, which is our functional ability to enjoy life and participate in life, to me, there's no mystery there whatsoever. And I think you're the living example of this. And I can tell from even through our screens right now, but if you maintain muscle, if you do what you need to do to hold on to muscle as much as possible and stay stronger, and if you pay attention to your joints and try to maintain healthy range of motion, and if you move three-dimensionally and just do all you can to get a little bit of cardiovascular exercise, to raise your heart rate and get a little bit out of breath, then I don't think there's any mystery at all as to being able to maintain your ability to participate in life to a very old age. Will there be some decline? Of course, absolutely, right? I don't run nearly as fast now as I did when I was 40, certainly when I was 30, but I'm still out there. I'm still, sprinting from stop sign to street light and participating in that way. So to me, strength is the linchpin that allows all of these other things to happen. When muscle goes away, the downstream effects of the loss of muscle means there's more stress on the joints as a result. And everything is harder to do, right? Climbing stairs is harder. Lifting something is harder. So muscle is absolutely number one. You know, I often say the fastest way to get old is to become weaker. And the fastest way to feel younger is to get stronger.
It also, with the wasting of the muscle, if you're not building your muscle, you're impacting your balance. And that's a very big, important topic for people in the second half of life, is balance.
No question. Yeah, no question about it. Of course, so much of our balance and our ability to, you know, just maneuver in life comes back to the center of our body, our hip girdle, right? Making sure our hips are stable and strong, and our trunk, absolutely, and our feet, and, you know, that they're functioning the way, you know, way that they are designed. So all of that can definitely lead to a higher or lower risk of falling. And of course, if we do end up, you know, having a fall, our body's ability to handle that stress comes back to that holistic integration that we talked about earlier.
This is the second time you mentioned the word feet, and I just love that, because I have a real, I don't want to say a foot fetish, but when I finally realized the connection with the feet and how you can work your feet and strengthen them and make them more flexible, if you don't have that stable base of support, you're really not in a good place.
No, it's our feet are so important, and I'm laughing at myself now. There's a chapter in my book on entitled "How to Improve Your Feet," and
There you go.
So much in there that I talk about, from maintaining the mobility of our feet, making sure all of those joints are moving. You know, one of the things I learned in the years working in a gait lab is that no two people have the same exact shape of the bones of their feet. So we all have different levels of inherent motion or stiffness. Our ability to pronate or supinate is very individual in nature. And of course, the intrinsic muscles of our feet are so important, right? Those are those muscles that are only inside the feet. And we have many of them, and they tend to become weakened over time, which increases our risk for something some of our listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with, plantar fasciitis, right? That plantar fascia can get beat up on a little bit if the intrinsic muscles of the feet are weakened a little bit. So I think the bulk of the chapter in my book on feet is about making sure to wear shoes that allow the toes to splay. And spending as much time as we can barefooted to improve the sensory input into our body. As you know, our feet contain all of these proprioceptors, small nerve proprioceptors, Pacinian corpuscles, and we could go on with all of the technical terms. But the bottom line is, without that sensory input from our environment into our feet, our body doesn't know where it is in space. And so this largely impacts our balance as well. It's a little bit like wearing a, you know, we spend our life in shoes naturally, but it's, you know, it's analogous to wearing a very, very thick winter glove and then expecting, you know, that we could handle something that requires a little bit of sensitivity. And the reality is that, you know, that's just not possible. So getting out of those pointy-toed shoes, strengthening the intrinsic muscles of our feet, and just allowing our toes to splay and spending more time barefooted. I mean, that is amazing. And of course, we mentioned earlier about starting small. Hopefully everyone remembers that if you've spent your life in shoes, you don't want to go out tomorrow and, you know, walk 2 miles barefooted down the road. That would be a big mistake. So ease into it very, very carefully. Your feet, the bottoms of your feet, if you've never been barefooted or at least, you know, not having been barefooted since you were an infant, perhaps, but the bottoms of your feet are going to be very sensitive. But over time, they become toughened up a little bit, and it'll get easier. Just don't overdo it at first.
Yeah, well, thank you for that little public service announcement. Because I remember when barefoot running was a big thing several years ago,
Oh my
and
God.
people thought, oh, okay, so they just threw off their shoes and they'd just start running trails and stuff with absolutely no preparation. And that's not really a good way to go about it.
No, good business for physical therapists, though, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what made you decide to write your book, because that's a really big leap.
I think I became increasingly passionate about sharing what I've learned. And so I wanted to do more speaking. I wanted to get out and try to reach more people. And naturally, our connection on LinkedIn allowed us to be able to see how, just trying to get more information out and try to educate people. But I think when COVID hit, and to me, the amount of ill health that I saw in our environment at that time,
Mhm.
and it kind of shocked me a little bit. And I thought, you know what, the best way for me to really get the word out, or at least share what I've learned, is to write a book. And of course, I thought of it as perhaps a great business card for speaking as
Mhm.
well, too. So I sat down one day. I said, you know what, I got to do this. I've had many people for many years say to me, you should write a book. I've done a lot of writing over a lot of years, but I never made that decision to write the book. So yeah, I think COVID is what kind of pushed me into it and said, you know what, it's time to get it done.
So when did you publish?
Um, on my 63rd birthday of last year. So it's coming up on a year since I published, November 17th of last year. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been remarkable, actually. I think I have 120, I think it's 120 something reviews on Amazon now, and
Nice.
they're all pretty amazing, actually. It's very heartwarming and humbling to
Mhm.
have someone, share with you that, something you shared with them has impacted their life in a
Mhm.
positive way.
Just out of curiosity, do you think you have another book in you?
Yes, I do. I sort of made the decision, and I remember posting this on Facebook one day, and everybody celebrated it. There's two more books that I want to write, but the first, believe it or not, is a children's book,
Hmm.
where I tell the story. I can see it now. It's a young boy, because I have a 5-year-old grandson. His name is Theo, and I always think of him. But it's the story of a young boy and his dog, and how they come and their relationship together to learn about the importance of health at a very young age. So I think that's the next one in me,
Mhm.
honestly and truly, because I think at the end of the day, I want to reach other folks our age,
Mhm.
and help them to understand that it's never too late to make a change, and they can
Right.
they can make tomorrow better if they just start today. It's never, ever, ever too late. I really believe that for the overwhelming majority.
Mhm.
So I want to reach more of those folks, but I really want to share more with children as well, too, and younger folks, to try to become just a little bit more proactive and a little bit more aware at a younger age. Even though, listen, at the end of the day, I think it's our human nature to procrastinate on these things,
Mhm.
to put off until tomorrow what we might do today, especially as it relates to our health.
Mhm.
But I still think it's important.
Oh, I think it's great that you would be, targeting children. Things are so different when we were children, when we were growing up. I mean, we're always told, go outside and play, go do
That's
this.
right.
And,
That's right.
we made games, we made things up, we used our imagination. That's what we did. And now it's almost like everybody's sitting inside. It would break my heart when I see like some of the young moms in ballet class would bring their kids to ballet class. And while they were taking class, the kids playing with devices. And I mean,
Yeah.
I understand it's convenient and I don't want to, and I'm not judging, but still, we spend so much time. We never did that. I mean, we didn't even have that much TV time. We were allowed like 30 minutes a day, and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, it has changed, Cheryl, and I don't know what the answers are, because I know it's
Mhm.
complex, right? I mean, there are so many challenges that are different now than they were when we were young.
Right.
That's for sure. But I so believe in the importance of, kids using their imagination and just being outdoors more. And I think part of it is safety for one reason or another. The things that I did as a kid, now I have a hard time believing my daughter would allow Theo to do, just because she'd be worried about his safety. But I'm like, at the end of the day, we've got to get out there and, do fun things that, may at one point or another seem a little precarious or dangerous, but still climb that tree, I say,
Yes. So from a safety standpoint, especially being a martial artist, I'm more concerned about the two-legged predators out there rather than getting hurt. You do have a story. If you want to share it, you can, that you had a near fatal accident when you were 10 years old. When I was 5 years old, almost five, it was a few months before my 5th birthday, I almost fell off of a roller coaster.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
crazy story. But if it were not for my older sister being in the little car with me and being able to grab me by the seat of my pants, literally, all she could grab were my underpants, and she's
oh my
trying to
God.
yank me back in, and we kept hitting these bumps, and I would go further and further out of the car. And I could see, I'm hanging out of the car, and you could see the adults running underneath me. And there's my mother, who was 7 months pregnant, with her arms outstretched like she was going to catch me if I fell. And I thought, this is not a good thing. I have never seen my mother run ever in my entire life, let alone catch something. But fortunately, it turned out okay.
Wow, that sounds frightening.
It was a little scary. I didn't go back on a roller coaster until I was 17.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever gotten on. It's been a long time since I've been on one. They're not my favorites.
No, not mine either.
No, I think when I think back in my childhood, of course, as you mentioned, I had a near fatal drowning as a 10-year-old, but around that same period of time, I was bullied pretty severely. And I talk about that in the book quite a bit. Because it really impacted, I think, my own life, in that I believe I spent a lot of time trying to prove that I was tough for many years. I always, people ask me why I did Ironman. I go, oh, why? Because I was bullied. I mean, what better way to prove how tough you are than to go qualify for the Ironman World Championships, especially when you were, afraid of the water, because I didn't go near the water for 26 years after that.
Right.
After that experience. Yeah, so I think that, desire to prove my toughness turned into perfectionism and other things, which I would always say were a blessing and a curse. I always say our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also, I always like to say that living well and looking good is the best revenge.
Right. There you go. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I couldn't have said it better myself. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Al, I am so happy that we had this conversation. I'm so happy you came on the show today. This has been absolutely awesome. I could talk to you all day long.
Well, thank you for having me. The pleasure's been all mine. I think you're amazing. You're obviously you embody everything that I wish more people embarked on. You look amazing, and you're sharing a great message. I'm a little nervous about what all those things are in the back behind you there, but I have a feeling you'll be kind to whomever you take them out on.
It just depends. It depends on the person, and it depends on the day. I will tell you this, my husband does sleep with one eye open.
I don't doubt it for a moment.
And he doesn't worry about me anymore the way he used to, that's for sure.
That's amazing. That's
so
amazing.
If you could just tell the audience how they can get a hold of you. First of all, before you do that, I want to tell you, I did love your YouTube channel. I mean, you've got some incredible social media, and I really loved the one titled, I think it's the most recent, Get Busy Living or Get Busy Dying. Boy, that was pretty profound.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think we all have our favorite movies, Cheryl, right? There's movies that we go back to and we've watched numerous times. Perhaps there's a message that really resonates with us. And for me, one of those movies is The Shawshank Redemption. And there's a quote, and you just mentioned it, from that movie that I think really embodies everything we've talked about today. And your listeners may remember, if they've seen the movie, there's a moment when Andy and Red are sitting on the ground and they're leaning up against a wall, and Andy's just gotten out of solitary. And they're talking about someday getting out of prison. And then Andy shares this dream he has for the future with Red of living the rest of his days in a city on the coast of Mexico, a place Andy describes as warm with no memory. And do you remember the name of the city?
I don't. I never saw The Shawshank Redemption. I couldn't
Oh,
bring myself to see it because I
oh,
thought it was heartbreaking, and I just.
oh no, you have to watch it. It's great. So the name of the city is called Zuantaneo.
Oh.
So as Andy is describing this dream he has to his friend Red, the music is pensive, and Andy's eyes are sparkling, and it's almost crazy if you think about it, because they're both imprisoned, and they have very little chance of ever getting out. So finally, Red turns to Andy and says, "Andy, I think you should stop doing this to yourself. These are shitty pipe dreams. Mexico's way down there, and we're in here, and that's the way it is." And of course, Andy, grits his teeth, and he's looking at him, and you can just see this resolve kind of taking over his body. And he turns to Red and he says, "Yeah, I guess that's the way it is. I'm in here and it's down there. I guess it comes down to a simple choice, really. Get busy living or get busy dying."
Oh, wow.
I think it's based on a book, by the way, by Stephen King, who is the well-known horror writer. I know a lot of people that are fans of Stephen King's work, but I think this was probably his best work, because to me that really encapsulates, again, everything that we've talked about. We're either embarking on living life in the best way that we can, or unfortunately watching ourselves sort of suffer a slow death before our actual demise. It's one or the other.
Yeah, well, I would rather
Yeah.
die happy and
Yes.
healthy.
Yes, for sure. That's the
So
goal.
tell the audience how they can get a hold of you. Of course, all of the links are going to be in the show notes forever and ever,
Yeah.
but I'd like for the guests to be able to share.
Yes,
and
thank you.
where
Well,
they can get your book.
thank you. Well, my book, we can either get that on Amazon, or at my website, theallyman.com. And of course, I'm on all of the social media channels, as you mentioned. I don't think a great job at all of them, because it's just too much work to try to do it all, being a solopreneur. But I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So for any of your listeners that are business folks that are spend any time on that space, I probably engage there almost more than any other space. But I'm on Instagram as well, and on Facebook a little bit too. Yeah, and then of course I'd mentioned earlier, pursuitathleticperformance.com. I've got 6 online courses there that are movement related courses that really reflect all the years of work I've done as a strength and conditioning coach and a movement specialist. So those are there as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks again, Al. Thank you for being on the show. It has been wonderful having you. And once you do get that children's book written and published, give me a call or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll have you back on the show and you can talk about that.
That sounds great, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. What a wonderful, wonderful episode. I just love this conversation. So many wonderful pearls of wisdom, how you can live a long, healthy, vibrant life well into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. So do go to Al's website, check out his social media, get his book. It sounds like it's really an amazing book and a lot of really good stories in there, as well as more valuable tips. And remember to get busy living, or else you're going to get busy dying. And that is the way
Amen.
of the FemiNinja.